The biggest unsolved abduction in the Midwest has to be the Jodi Huisentruit case. The morning news anchor disappeared in June of 1995 as she was leaving to go to work at KIMT, a local news station in Mason City, Iowa. Her body has never been found. A new documentary on Hulu, her last broadcast, The Abduction of Jodi Huisentruit, reveals some new discoveries in the case.
People don't just vanish on their way to work with no witnesses, no trace.
They found the car keys laying on the ground, red high-heel shoes. You can see drag marks. We've got a problem.
Good Monday morning. Welcome to Daybreak. I'm Jodi Huisentruit.
Less than 24 hours after it aired, she would vanish.
KIMT news anchor Jodi Huisentruit was just 27 at the time of her disappearance.
Things went from we're just looking for somebody missing to we're looking for somebody that was abducted.
There's a show called Gone at Dawn. It's on 2020.
The 2020 show, that's why I reached out to Mason City Police. My information just fit in there too much. You know that burning gut feeling that you get? I couldn't let it go.
Now police have new leads that could mean finally finding her killer.
She told me she thought someone was following her.
Was this person a stalker? Was it a crazed fan?
Time to get this done. It's time to get this case solved.
It's just awful that this happened. You know, where is she?
We were the only ones given access to join the search and film it.
I had a bad feeling.
It gives me chills just to think about it.
I just couldn't believe my eyes.
Holy crap, this is really real.
I don't care what it takes.
Maybe this is it. Maybe we're gonna find her now.
Let's find Jodi.
Her last broadcast, The Abduction of Jodi Huisentruit, only on Hulu.
Well, with me today on the Life Unscripted podcast is Maria Oz. She is the Senior Vice President and the Executive Producer and Head of Development of Committee Films, which, by the way, produced the documentary. Well done, by the way. I watched it. It was fantastic.
Thank you.
Now, for those unfamiliar, I mean, so many people know about the story in the Midwest, but of course there might be a few who are listening who are going, I don't know about this. Maybe they're younger. Let's, if you can, kind of set up what happened on that day in 1995 with Jodi.
Absolutely. Yeah. Jodi Huisentruit's missing persons case probably is the biggest missing persons case in the Midwest. And Jodi was a news anchor, a morning show anchor on a show called Daybreak at KIMT TV in Mason City, Iowa. On the morning of June 27th of 1995, she was running late for work. Her producer, Amy Coons, gave her a call and just said, Jodi, are you coming in? Jodi answered the phone, oh my gosh, I'll be right in. And occasionally Jodi would be late for work. So it wasn't anything, I think shocking for Amy to have to, call her and wake her up maybe. But Jodi, by all accounts, gathered her belongings, was heading out to get to work, and she never made it. So Jodi's belongings, her hairdryer, her shoes, a bent key, some paperwork, all of these things were found strewn about in the parking lot once police were actually called. Amy had to go on the air and notified a different person in production to, contact law enforcement and just somebody needs to go check on her. And Amy thought, maybe she fell in the shower or did something,
right,
like that happen. Certainly never expected that she would have just vanished into thin air in the parking lot. But that's exactly what happened. And so she has been missing for 30 years. It was just the 30th anniversary of her disappearance. And, I think law enforcement in Mason City, they are extremely dedicated to try to get this case solved. The family, my heart goes out to them. Yeah, I can't imagine what that would be like.
What do the investigators know about the night before she all of a sudden just disappeared?
Certainly one of the things law enforcement tried to do immediately was really, retrace her steps, right? What was happening the night before? So we know that Jodi's day before, she had actually played golf in a charity golf tournament in Mason City. After that, after the dinner, she went back to her apartment at some point. She called a friend of hers. There's a recording, or not a recording, but a log of that. Mm-hmm. Only long distance calls were recorded then, actually, which is sort of interesting. If you think about, well, who else did she talk to? Let's check the phone bill.
But it was a different world back then.
It was a different world. It was a different world. So only long distance calls were recorded, but there was one of those at, I think it was 8:23 p.m. So they know she was in her apartment, called her friend Kelly at that time. There has been an individual named John Van Cise, a friend of hers, who had come forward and said, well, Jodi spent some time with me. She came over after that golf tournament. She watched this video of a birthday party that he and some friends had thrown for her a couple weeks prior to that. And then she went home. That's basically what police know. So there's not really a definitive time when they can say Jodi was back in her apartment, and stayed in for the night. There's nothing like that. There's no security cameras then. Like I said, really the only, truly thing that's documented is that phone call at 8:23. But certainly there's John Van Cise's story of him meeting up with her too.
Okay. Now, she was a local celebrity in Mason City, and she seemed to be beloved. Tell us what you know. I mean, I know a little bit about what I've learned, but for others who may not be familiar with the story, tell us a little bit about her.
Yes, I feel so fortunate to have gotten to know her family a little bit and for them to have shared so many wonderful stories about Jodi, also many of her colleagues. So Jodi always wanted to be in news. She wanted to be in broadcasting. Connie Chung was one of her idols. And, she went to school for broadcast journalism at St. Cloud State University. She actually became a flight attendant for a very brief period of time, but then she did get back into news. She worked at 2 stations before KIMT. She worked at a station in Iowa, a different station there in Cedar Rapids. I think it was KGAN. And then she also worked at KSAX, which is in Alexandria, Minnesota. And I know her family really liked it when she worked there because it was quite close to where Jodi grew up, which was in Long Prairie. And by all accounts, she loved sports. She loved people. She was very outgoing. She was always networking and trying to improve. She had this thick Minnesota accent, thicker than mine, even. I think thicker than mine. Yeah. But she was beloved. And this is a, different time. People watched the local news all the time. That's where you got your news, especially in a town like Mason City, Iowa. They don't have professional sports teams. They don't have other stuff. A lot of the celebrities were broadcasters, right, in these towns. And many of her coworkers talk about that. They would go out, they'd be recognized at the, at the bar, at the grocery store, at the post office. So, yeah, she was beloved. That is for sure.
Now, your background is in journalism, and you've won multiple Emmys, and she's won an Edward R. Murrow Award. Congratulations for some of the investigative projects that you involved in. That's a big deal.
Yes, I loved my time in news spent doing investigations. Some of my favorite things were doing undercover things, and I worked at both KSTP, the ABC affiliate in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and then also WCCO, the CBS affiliate.
So you have this buildup of news skills and of investigative work. You've also been in the news business, and I think that what a lot of women can relate to, not just women who are in television, but that fear. Every woman's fear is, I know I used to for many years get up in the middle of the night, go to my car, and it's a reality. I wish it wasn't. I wish it weren't a reality, but it is our fear of someone, perhaps abducting or something, attacking us. And this, unfortunately, was what happened to her. And so I'm sure you can relate to this story.
Absolutely. I think that any woman, whether it's, getting up early to go to a job on television news on the morning show or any job really, or you're out walking to your car after going out at night. I mean, I can tell you, everyone knows that feeling. You're just kind of on alert, right? And you've got your keys in your hand and you're just like looking around and, the fear is something bad could happen to me. And in Jodi's case, something bad did happen to her. And I think as much as you try to tell yourself, I'm just overreacting, it's probably fine. There are certainly instances where everything is not okay. And in Jodi's case, it's just been extremely difficult to figure this out. There's just not a lot to go on. No security cameras.
Right.
Even though she was kidnapped in the parking lot of her apartment complex where there's many windows that look out onto this parking lot where she vanished.
Right.
People heard screams, but nobody called police. And so there's no eyewitnesses. There's just ear witnesses.
That is surprising to me, that nobody called in. You have to also think about where we were at in 1995. As you said, there weren't Ring cameras, there weren't security cameras. A lot of people didn't carry cell phones even back then. We had computers, but maybe she had a work computer. And so the forensic evidence has really improved. We have the tools now that we didn't have back then, which I'm sure has really made this difficult to solve. And I know there are some very dedicated detectives on this case. Tell us about, there's one person in particular who you see a lot of in this documentary.
Yes, Detective Terrence Prohaska. He's been the lead investigator on this case for years. He really got to know this as he was kind of rising through the ranks there in Mason City, and then he was given the opportunity to be in charge of this case. I've talked to him many times. We were given really some extraordinary access to follow him on a chase of this new tip, this new lead that comes about as part of our series. But he studied that case. I mean, this is a massive case file cabinets full of material. Certainly all of this has kind of been ingested and is, on computers as well. But I think just visibly thinking about this from that perspective of what does a case that's a 30-year-old case look like? I mean, there's been countless interviews really here, lots of different individuals who've been looked at, many, many tips, hundreds of tips, if not, more than 1,000, I would venture to guess,
right.
But yeah, Sergeant Prohaska, I think, he is determined to crack this. He works extensively with the family, with the community to try to keep it out there. And, this docuseries is a good example of that.
This podcast is sponsored by Katie Waltman Jewelry, which offers a wide range of rings, bracelets, necklaces, and earrings. Her jewelry has been featured in Elle Magazine, InStyle, People, Oprah.com. It is absolutely beautiful. Premium materials like gold and silver, pearls and crystals. And I have the Opalite Star Huggy earrings. I love them. They're delicate. They're the perfect length. And the opal stone, it goes with everything. It picks up the colors you're wearing. That's why I love it. And the jewelry is budget friendly. Maybe you buy it for you or a gift for a girlfriend. So I have arranged the highest exclusive discount for my listeners, 20% off. Just use my promo code LifeUnscripted. Once again, LifeUnscripted for 20% off. And by the way, that deal ends on September 30th, 2025. And I do get a commission when you use my code. So please, if you would, I would love to have it. There you go. Life Unscripted. There's the promo code, 20% off. And you can find all those beautiful pieces of jewelry at katiewaltman.com. I know in part of a documentary, there was some interest in Winstead, Minnesota. Tell us about that. I know we don't want to give too much away here, but at the same time, there was certainly at the time, too, media coverage of what was happening in Winstead.
Yes, it was an interesting period of time to know exactly what was going on in Winstead because we were there and we were part of this. There was a search of some property that was done in Winstead looking for any sign of Jodi or her remains based on this tip that gets investigated as part of our docuseries. At the time, this was making headlines really not just here in Minnesota but across the country and everybody wanting to know what is going on in Winstead. I think it was really just a local paper that got wind that there was something happening there and some information that Mason City police had been out there. Well, pretty much Mason City is known for this case. Why would Mason City be there in this small town of Minnesota? But, we certainly weren't going to release any information at that point in time. This was part of a much longer project, which is what you'll see on this docuseries. But there was a lot of speculation about that. And I think by watching this, viewers and listeners will be able to hear exactly why we were there, what we were looking for, and how that figures into this case.
So you were embedded with the Mason City Police Department, and they let you kind of follow them around for periods of time when they would get tips, and would they kind of give you a heads up? Because you had been working on this case for some time.
I'd been working on this case for years. Yeah, the first project we did related to Jodi's case was a 2020 special, which aired in 2022. And really, it was after that a woman came forward who was a really good friend of Jodi's growing up. Her name is Patty. Patty had some suspicion that her one-time ex-husband may have been involved. She described him as an individual who always had somewhat of an obsession with Jodi, was always interested in knowing, well, where is she? What's she up to? After Jodi vanished and, after they'd been divorced for some time, he called her on the anniversary, thinking about Jodi, and she just said, wow, that's kind of weird, right? That's kind of weird. She did bring her suspicions to Mason City Police, actually a few years before our documentary aired. I think that they looked into it. We talk about this in the docuseries too. Looked into it a little bit, but they didn't have quite as much information as, was obtained this next time she reached out. So when she reached out again after this 2020 special, that is really what led them to kind of chase this lead down a little bit further. There are some other, I would say interesting reasons or possible connections that were made between things in the case file and this individual's background that really sort of ratcheted up Mason City Police's interest in this individual. And so we were, as a result of having covered this for 2020, we were given that opportunity to go along with Mason City as they chased this new lead.
There have also been, it sounds like, quite a few bits of misinformation out there, which is it's helpful to have this documentary and to show that, okay, there have been a lot of rumors, a lot of speculation, and some of that was able to be addressed in the documentary.
Yes, and I think, this is always a challenge for law enforcement, not just in a cold case or, a long-standing case, but any case, really. If some little piece of information gets out there, however it gets out there, maybe it's something that was misconstrued, maybe somebody, just literally made something up, but once something gets out there, it kind of gets perpetuated, right, in different media, whether it's social media or even, news stories and things like that from legitimate sources. And so there's been things out there, for example, there's been supposedly a bloody palm print found on her car, or even a palm print found on her car. Both of those things are incorrect. There was a palm print, a partial palm print that was taken from the scene, but it was from a light post in the parking lot, right? Not from her car. And that kind of changes the context of everything with this palm print. Because, a light post in a parking lot, well, a lot of people might have touched that. It could quite likely have nothing to do with Jodi's disappearance. But the way this palm print had been represented up until this docuseries really has been on her car, like, could it have been this person on that day? That's not right.
Well, as you said, and from being in the news business, I know that there are, a lot of legitimate news sources out there. They put out a story, and perhaps at the time that was a question, and maybe a reporter went to go interview the police officer about it, and it was discovered, no, that wasn't really found on the car. The problem is when people go online, and that might have been the headline that day for that story, but then that gets recycled over and over and over. And that's where it's really important for people when they're curious about stories that they really have to look at truly the source and where they're getting the information.
Right. And that is a really important distinction to make. And that is something we talk a little bit about in the docuseries as well. I think there's certainly many people and different organizations out there who really want to be involved in helping find Jodi and what happened to her. And, I think that is absolutely admirable. I think the difference, though, when folks are looking at information that's been on social media or whatever the case may be, you really have to take a look. Do they have access to the actual, law enforcement case file? Have they really discussed this one-on-one, with the investigator, to make sure that those facts are accurate? And, I think that can be challenging because law enforcement can be very reticent to release all the details, and rightfully so. I think we were lucky enough to be able to clarify some things in this docuseries. Certainly there's other things that, we can't include or that, maybe even we don't know, right? But I think the goal here is always not to keep the public in the dark. It's certainly to let them in on what they're able to, but then also preserve evidence in case they need that, right, for prosecution of somebody ultimately.
And there are, it sounds like, a couple of people of interest And the police have also had some challenges because not all of them are, some of them are deceased.
Right. And so this case, where do you start, right, with a 30-year investigation? Okay, we want to make this docuseries and we know we're going to follow kind of this new lead, but what else do we include? This is a question I get a lot. Why, how many persons of interest really are there, and why did you focus on these 4? And so the docuseries does focus on 4, which really covers a large part, really the whole investigation. Kind of, we have somebody from those very first days, another individual who gets looked at a couple years down the road, this brand new tip, and then yet another one that came up after we started filming. And so there have been more persons of interest than just these 4, let me be clear. But, we wanted to kind of take a look at 4 where I think there's either been a lot of media attention or none. Also cases where there's a lot of evidence that could point in one direction, which might make people wonder, okay, could this person be involved? If you were to watch any one of these, segments of the show on each of these individuals, you might come away and think, oh, it seems like this person did it. But then you have to watch this next one and this next one and this next one. And that really is indicative of the totality of this case, right? That's the challenge. There are a lot of people and a lot of circumstantial evidence, markers that could suggest someone that we're focusing on, or maybe not. Somebody totally different was involved.
When you went to KIMT and they're no longer doing newscasts out of that station, correct? And so you're truly walking into a time capsule there where Jodi's desk is still there. What was that like?
Oh, yeah, that was emotional. I'd always wanted to kind of go there, and when we did the 2020, we didn't have that opportunity, but we did this time. The news director at the time there, his name is Dan Klaus, wonderful man, knew Jodi, worked with her, and he had ascended the ranks. He was the news director of KIMT, which still is broadcasting out of Rochester, Minnesota, but they're just not doing it out of Mason City anymore. But walked into the TV station, and it really, truly, like you said, it's like a time capsule. There's boxes of old tapes, old equipment, things that feel a little bit archaic kind of now, right, in television. And sure enough, her desk, it's right there in the newsroom in the same spot that it was in, as far as I am told. And it's kind of, it's sad. For me, I'd worked on this so much, and I'd seen all this video of, the newsroom back at that time, because of course news crews were filming in there, right? And also video of investigators taking things out of her desk. Mm-hmm. And then here's this desk, and there's like the KIMT stickers on there. And, I sat there, I opened the drawers, and, it's just a strange, sad, surreal experience. Just to think about, like the vibrancy of who Jodi was, of the newsroom back then, and now it's just this stark landscape. Yeah.
To go back in time, and I worked in Austin, Minnesota. That was my very first job in television. I was not in Minnesota at the time. I was in Albuquerque working as a reporter, but of course I still had a lot of connections to people in Minnesota. And so when this story broke, we all, our hearts are just heavy ever since then that we haven't been able to find her. And it is a story that I guess, and by watching this and seeing some of the family members talk, some of her friends, it has had a pretty big effect on the community. And you think about, this is a relatively small town. Mason City is, compared to other cities, and where something like this happened, I'm sure that it still kind of hangs there in the air, even 30 years later.
Absolutely. It is a very long-standing mystery, and I think many people in this is a community where a lot of people who were there then are there now, and really just want to see this case solved. It definitely changed, I think, the fabric of that community, and it remains changed, really. I think, the detective, he grew up in Iowa. He knew about the case. Even before he was working there, right? And that's really the case. For a lot of folks, they just know about it, and they just really want to bring her home.
Yeah. The community does.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what the work you did on this, I know it took years.
It did.
And a lot of interviews and kind of going through time capsules. I know I thought that it was quite interesting. Me, like anybody else that watches this and lives in the Midwest and knows the story, we want, there to be some answers about what happened to Jodi Huisentruit. So if you get a chance, you should check it out. This is a documentary. It's on Hulu. It's called Her Last Broadcast, The Abduction of Jodi Huisentruit, and it is now playing. Maria, fantastic job. And hopefully we'll have you back when there might be an answer finally.
I hope so. I hope so.
Thank you.
Thank you.